I could hear them laughing from across the street, their voices blending with the crisp morning air. "Look at her, thinking she's some investor buying that piece of trash," one neighbor scoffed, her robe tied tight around her bulging waist as she sipped bitter coffee. Another chuckled, shaking his head while adjusting his expensive lawn sprinkler. I didn't answer. I just stood there, keys in hand, staring at the crumbling porch and cracked windows of the house I had just bought. The paint peeled like dry skin under the sun, and weeds reached higher than my knees. But as I stepped onto the unstable porch and felt the wood creak beneath my boots, I didn't feel fear. I felt freedom. This was mine. All mine. And for once in my life, no one could take it away. Not my ex who drained my bank account before vanishing. Not my parents who told me I'd never amount to anything. This was the first brick in a silent fortress I would build alone. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and old secrets. The floors were warped, the ceilings sagged in places, and graffiti lined the kitchen walls like angry whispers left behind by kids with nowhere to go. I ran my hand across the chipped counter, imagining what it would become. Sleek granite, bright white cabinets, maybe copper handles catching the morning light. "What a waste," I heard from outside as a passing jogger glanced in through the broken window. I ignored him. I didn't need their approval. For years I had bent myself backwards to earn it, from bosses who never learned my name to fake friends who only called when they needed something. But here, in this rotting shell of a home, I felt reborn. I dropped my backpack on the dusty floor and sat cross-legged, inhaling the heavy scent of mildew and dust. For the first time in months, I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. The city had plans for this land, and I was finally one step ahead. That night, I barely slept. The wind rattled loose window panes, whistling through cracks like mournful ghosts. But I didn't mind. I lay on my thin camping mat in the living room, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring at the collapsing ceiling beams. Each creak of the house felt like an ancient lullaby, reminding me that even things built to last eventually bend under the weight of time, but some refuse to break. Just before dawn, I brewed instant coffee on a small gas burner I'd brought. As I sipped the bitter liquid, I heard footsteps crunching on the dead grass outside. Peeking through the window, I saw my neighbor Greg, the one with the perfect lawn and matching SUV. He shook his head, chuckling to himself as he walked his golden retriever. "Fool," he muttered, thinking I couldn't hear, but I heard every syllable. And instead of anger, I felt an unexpected calm wash over me. Let them laugh, I thought. Because soon, none of them would be laughing anymore. The next morning, I woke up with determination burning in my chest. I spent hours walking around the property, taking photos of every crack, every broken tile, every leaning wall. I documented everything meticulously, uploading it into folders I labeled before. The neighbors watched with amused curiosity as I measured the porch steps and examined the old oak tree in the backyard. "She's crazy," I heard one whisper to another, but I smiled under my breath. Because I wasn't crazy. I was strategic. That afternoon, I went to the city planning office with my stack of research. I sat across from a tired-looking clerk and asked for copies of the most recent development plans. As his fingers clicked the keyboard, I noticed the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He leaned closer to the screen, reading silently before glancing at me. Did you buy that house on Orchard Street?" he asked. I nodded calmly. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice quiet and steady, "and I know what it's worth." If this story resonates with you, please hit like and subscribe. It helps more people discover these true stories of silent power. As I left the planning office, clutching the thick envelope of documents, I felt the summer breeze brush my face with an almost mocking gentleness. I walked back home with steady steps, each one echoing the silent promise I made to myself years ago, that I would never again let anyone decide my worth. That evening, I sat cross-legged on the dusty living room floor, spreading out the maps and papers under the dim light of my camping lantern. My eyes scanned each zoning line, each redevelopment proposal, until I found what I was looking for. A new transportation hub was planned, right through my block. The city would need my property to build it. I closed my eyes and let out a long, trembling breath. All those people who mocked me had no idea they were watching a queen quietly build her empire brick by broken brick. The following week, I began cleaning the house, not to restore it, but to prepare it for what was coming. I swept layers of dirt off the cracked tiles, pulled down moldy curtains that disintegrated in my hands, and aired out each room until the stagnant air finally moved with life. Every morning, the same neighbors walked by, whispering and pointing. "She thinks she's on HGTV," Greg laughed to his friend, sipping his overpriced protein shake. But they didn't see what I saw. They saw rotting wood and termite nests. I saw leverage. I saw negotiations. I saw freedom. That night, I sat on the floor near the front window, eating instant noodles straight from the pot as the moonlight spilled across the exposed beams. I watched their houses glowing with warm lamps and soft music, and for the first time, I didn't envy them, because while they clung to comfort, I was building something unbreakable. Days turned into weeks, and soon a letter arrived in my rusted mailbox. The envelope was stamped with the city's seal. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, unfolding the crisp paper with quiet ceremony. It was an official notice of proposed purchase. They needed my property to begin construction within the year. I let out a slow exhale, reading the number they offered. It was decent, for someone desperate. I smiled softly, folding the paper and sliding it back into the envelope. That night, as rain drummed against the leaking roof, I sat under my blanket with a small lamp illuminating the documents. I drafted my counteroffer carefully, line by line, with the calm precision of a surgeon, because they thought they were negotiating with a fool. They didn't realize they were standing before a woman who had been underestimated her entire life, and who had learned exactly how to turn that into power. The next morning, I walked into the city development office with my hair pulled back tightly, wearing the same faded jeans and flannel shirt from my cleaning days. They didn't need to see power in my clothes. They would see it in my eyes. I handed the counteroffer to the same clerk who had first given me the plans. His eyebrows rose as he scanned the document. "You're asking for triple," he said quietly, almost as if warning me. I nodded with a calm smile. "Yes, because you need this land, and I don't need to sell." For a moment, he just stared at me, perhaps seeing me for the first time. When I walked out of that office, the sun was high and hot, glaring off the metal rooftops. The neighbors watched from their porches as I returned home. Greg called out mockingly, "Get any good news today, investor?" I turned to him with a serene smile and said nothing, because real power doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives. Days passed without an answer. I spent them tending the yard, cutting down weeds with a rusted machete I found in the shed. Each swing felt like slicing away the doubts people planted in me over the years. At night, I lay awake listening to coyotes howl in the distant hills, their cries echoing through the broken windows like an anthem for the wild and unclaimed. On the fifth morning, a black SUV pulled up in front of my gate. Two men in suits stepped out, their leather shoes sinking slightly into the overgrown lawn. I wiped sweat from my brow and leaned on the machete as they approached. "Miss Carter?" one asked, his voice polite but tight. I nodded. "We've reviewed your counteroffer. The city is willing to meet you halfway." I let the silence stretch between us, feeling the sun beat down on my shoulders, the cicadas screaming in the trees. "No," I said softly. "Full offer or no deal." They looked at each other, surprised by my quiet defiance. I saw one of them glance around the property, probably thinking it was worthless, just a rotting pile of timber. But I knew better. They needed this land to keep their schedule on track, and delays cost money. Millions. "You're making a dangerous bet," the taller one warned, his polished shoes now dusty from my yard. I tilted my head slightly, feeling the breeze lift strands of my hair. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm making an informed decision." That afternoon, after they left, I sat on the back steps watching the sun set behind the old oak tree. The sky burned gold and pink, and for the first time in years, I felt my chest fill with peace. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about proving to myself that my worth was not measured by anyone else's opinion. It was defined by my quiet courage to stand my ground. A week later, an official letter arrived by courier. I opened it slowly, feeling my pulse throb in my fingertips. It was short and direct. "The city of Brookhaven accepts your proposed sale amount. Please contact our office to finalize transfer arrangements." I let out a quiet laugh, a sound that felt foreign after so many silent days. I folded the letter carefully, placing it on the kitchen counter where moonlight illuminated the fading graffiti. That night, I sat on the floor with a cup of tea, staring at the walls around me. I thought of every person who told me I was reckless, foolish, unworthy of success. I thought of the nights I cried myself to sleep in my car after losing my job. I thought of how I walked into this house feeling broken. And now I was leaving it as a woman no one could ever break again. I didn't scream in victory. I just smiled, letting the silence celebrate for me. The following day, I walked around the house for the last time. My boots echoed softly on the warped floors as I touched the peeling walls, feeling the cold texture beneath my fingertips. I stood in the kitchen, imagining the smell of fresh coffee that never brewed here, the laughter that never filled these empty rooms. But there was no sadness in me, only gratitude. Gratitude for the broken tiles that taught me resilience, for the leaky roof that taught me to adapt, for the graffiti that reminded me every scar has a story worth reading. As I locked the door for the final time, Greg watched from his porch, mouth slightly open. He didn't say anything this time. I walked past him with my head high and keys dangling from my fingers. For once, his silence felt louder than all his mockery combined. Because he saw it now. They all saw it. The woman they thought was foolish had outsmarted them all. I spent the next few weeks finalizing the paperwork, watching the numbers move through my bank account like silent warriors returning from battle. With each signature, each notarized page, I felt my spine straighten a little more. When the transfer was complete, I packed my few belongings into the trunk of my dusty old car. Before leaving town, I drove past the house one last time. Construction crews were already there, surveying the land, marking trees for removal, fencing off the perimeter. I parked across the street and watched as men in hard hats paced the yard where I once sat under the stars, dreaming of freedom. A quiet smile spread across my face. They saw an empty lot. I saw the place where I rose from ashes. As I drove away, the sun broke through the morning clouds, golden and fierce, lighting my path forward. I didn't know where I was going next. I just knew. I was unstoppable. 2 months later, I found myself standing in front of a small brick cafe in a quiet coastal town, miles away from the city that once mocked me. The cafe had a faded for sale sign hanging crooked in the window. Its paint was peeling, the awning torn by storms. But as I stepped inside, the scent of salt and old coffee grounds filled my lungs with hope. The realtor followed me, heels clacking on the worn tiles. "It needs a lot of work," she said apologetically. I smiled softly, running my hand over the chipped counter. "Good," I whispered, because I no longer feared ruins. I understood them. I rebuilt them. I made them powerful again. As I looked out the window at the ocean waves crashing beyond the boardwalk, my chest filled with that same quiet certainty I felt stepping onto the porch of my old house. Let them underestimate me, I thought. That's where my power begins. Thank you for watching until the end. If you've ever lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes, the loudest impact is made in silence. I bought the cafe with a portion of the money from the house sale, signing the final paperwork under the warm glow of a coastal sunset. The realtor handed me the keys with a curious smile, probably wondering why anyone would choose such a faded place. But I saw beyond the chipped bricks and leaking roof. I saw golden mornings filled with the rich aroma of roasted beans, the murmur of quiet conversations, and weary travelers finding peace within its walls. That night, I sat on the old wooden floor, hugging my knees to my chest, listening to the waves crashing outside. My entire life had been filled with people telling me what I couldn't do. But as the sea breeze swept through the cracked windows and the salty air kissed my skin, I whispered to myself, "Let them doubt me again. I build empires from their laughter." If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe. It helps more people discover these true stories of silent power. Thank you for watching until the end. If you've ever lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your words might inspire someone who needs silent courage today. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the loudest impact is made in silence.